Ramy Hassan is a 20-something first-generation Egyptian-American Muslim who often finds himself conflicted in the intersections of his Egyptian, American, and Muslim identities. Played by comedian Ramy Youssef, the Hulu series Ramy tells the very American story of finding yourself when you're not quite certain where to look. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm on the couch. All right, this is Ronald, and I am on the couch after watching Ramy, the second season, after finishing the second season of Ramy. Ramy, created by Ramy Youssef, Katcher, and Ryan Welch, starring Ramy Youssef, Mohammed Amer, Hiam Abbass, Dave Merheje, Amer Wakid, Calamwy, and Laith Nakli. Normally I look up how to spell these, so how to pronounce these, and I apologize in advance if I butchered any of those too bad. So Ramy is a show. It's kind of like another adult coming of age story about the main character, Ramy, who is kind of navigating through life. I think he's in his late 30s, early 30s, late 20s, and he's kind of navigating through life as an American so he's an American, but his ethnicity is Egyptian, and he is a Muslim. So this show grapples a lot with his interpretations of faith and legalism in faith, and dealing with how to be a, quote, good Muslim, as well as trying not to lean into and sometimes succumbing to the temptations of things that are uniquely American or uniquely for young people or people Ramy's age. So there's a lot of, you see a lot of back and forth tension between him and, trying to find a wife, because that's what, his Muslim faith and the Egyptian culture calls for within the show. Let me just pause there and say, I'm not an expert on Egyptian culture. I'm also not an expert on being a Muslim. So if I mess up anything, talking about any of this, it's just from my interpretation of the show, not any type of bias that I have against Egyptians or Muslims. And if I get it wrong, let me know. I'll fix it. That being said, it's all about him trying to do what's right by his family standards and even by his own interpretation of his faith, while also trying to live his life as a man. Now, during season 1, that conflict really spoke to me a lot. I am born and raised Pentecostal of my parents. If you study anything about the Pentecostal faith, we very much believe in what's called holiness, which is it's abstaining from all appearances of evil and abstaining from sin. So in a lot of ways, growing up in America and growing up in a world in which, growing up in the church world where we're sheltered from a lot that's going on outside of the church, which we call everything inside the church, we call it the world. You're out there in the world, you're living in the world, all that's worldly, you need to get those worldly thoughts off your mind, all that. So it's very much like when you think about the world, you think about it being an outside place. So what resonated with me was the idea of trying to walk through life as multiple things while trying not to disappoint anyone, so I don't want to disappoint my family. I certainly don't want to disappoint God. I don't want to disappoint saints at the church. I certainly don't want to disappoint my friends that are outside of the church. Like it feels like you're going through all these emotions, trying not to disappoint people based on their own based on their own interpretations. Another part that this show tackles, which I think it does very well, is the loose interpretations and sometimes strict interpretation of scripture. In this case, it would be the Quran. But even with Ramy dealing with himself having a sometimes stricter and sometimes looser interpretation of certain things that are in the Quran, and then dealing with the other folks around him who also have strict and loose interpretations of the of the Quran. And I say that to say that it puts him in a lot of weird situations where he's not sure who he's talking to and what they necessarily believe. And that's kind of, I feel like that's the core engine of the show. Like, here's a man trying to find his faith, and he is at times very strict with themselves, and at times very loose with themselves, and he's interacting with people who are also doing the same. But in a lot of ways, and I think in season one, they do a lot of tackling that question of faith. How does it look when he's dating? How does it look when he's having sex? How does it look when he's, meeting people, when he's interacting with new people, when he's meeting white folks, meeting other Egyptians, meeting other Muslims, all of that, when all of those things are happening, that's where the story begins to play out. And we learn a lot about Ramy. We learn that he is very much into self-preservation, but he also wants to be the good guy. And I think Insecure says that about Lawrence, I believe, in season 2, where it says that Lawrence where Lawrence was dating Tasha, and Tasha says to Lawrence, you're the worst type of dude because you're and we'll just say bad person because this is a friendly show. You're a bad person that thinks he's a good guy. And I think Ramy is a lot of that. He's a bad person who has not grappled with him being a bad person yet. And they lean into that in season 2. So in season 1, there's a lot of, you feel sorry for him. It's like, oh my goodness, he's grappling with all those things. And that resonated with me because I'm like, I grapple with these same things and I get it. Like, this is hard, trying to balance basically not trying to disappoint God while also trying to live your life as for lack of a better term, as normally as possible. And I can already hear the saints already be like, well, you're not supposed to be normal. You're supposed to be pleasing to God. And I'm like, I think it's easy to say that, but it's harder to live that. And especially when you've lived in a life where you're raised in this country, in America, and dealing with the things that we're dealing with growing up, even as Black folks, but even as humans walking around. I'm getting off the point. So in the first season, it deals a lot about it, personal attacks on faith, all that, his interactions with everybody else, his personal attachment to his faith, and his interactions with everybody else and what that looks like. In season 2, it really leans into Ramy expecting the world to kind of shape him into a better person, and how he's looking for the world to shape him into a better person. It's really tough to explain without giving away too much, but it goes down this path where I'm sitting there watching it and I was like, man, I don't think I like this show anymore. And I'm sitting there watching, and I couldn't stop watching because it's still a compelling show to watch. And I'm like, do I not like this? Because season 1, it ends. I'm like, wow, what a great season. What a great show. Recommend it to everybody. I'm about midway through season 2, and I'm just like, I don't think I like this show anymore. And I realized that while I'm seeing this, what I'm seeing happen is I'm seeing this person who's interacting with everyone, expecting them to all play roles in his life, expecting all of them to do stuff for him and bend to his will. And not in a way that he's being forceful, but in a way that he's always expecting something of these people that are all around him. And expecting them to help him get to his next goal. So everybody and around him is a character in his story. It's very egotistical. And watching this, I'm just like, the more I'm liking, the more I'm like, man, I'm not a fan of you. And I think you're reaching for the wrong things to try and change you. And I'm sitting there and I started having all these familiar feelings of, I'm going to keep watching this show, but I'm not really liking the main character. And I realized that what I'm watching is I'm watching Girls, the HBO show Girls. And I realized that Ramy is basically being Hannah Horvath, and I can preach an entire sermon, give a dissertation on how I feel about Hannah Horvath. Now I feel like she's a bad person, and she's reflective of Lena Dunham, who's also a bad person. And that's my opinion. That's not really, you don't have to take that as a fact. But with that being said, I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, okay, so that this shtick is that like she's a bad person and she's kind of floating through life expecting everyone to kind of help her get to whatever her goals are. Everything is very self-serving. So that's very much the case in Ramy until and I'm sitting here watching and I'm watching him like kind of stumble through, do these horrible things to people, keep like, kind of setting things up and just kind of bumble his way through in a way that's not very helpful or not very kind to other people, just very, very self-serving. And he finally gets to a point where a person turns to him and says, "Hey, yo, you're trash." Which when it happened, I was so happy because I feel like the problem with shows like this, these very egotistical millennial based shows, is that they want to show the complex nature of humanity, which always manifests itself in an awful person being awful and saying, "See, they're complicated." And there's never a person that turns to them and say, "You're not complicated, you are trash." Because the truth is, yes, we are all complicated, complex people, but that doesn't mean that we get to treat everybody any way we want. And while we all have had mistakes in our past, or we have all been a trash person to people in our past, and we're all somebody's nemesis, like we shouldn't just be walking around expecting everyone to give us something or expecting everyone to bend to our will and our needs. So when I get through, like about halfway through, I didn't like it so much. And then as I kept watching, I was like, maybe I do still like this show. So I just wrapped up the second season. I'm very much would be interested in seeing a third season of this show. Like when it got there, I was like, okay, so they're not going to let their main character off the hook, which I kind of feel like they do a lot in Girls, where they kind of, and it's funny, I recently had a conversation with girls talking about Hannah Horvath, and they likened her unto the Curb Your Enthusiasm character with Larry David, or to the characters in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And what I've always find about those shows that doesn't bother me as much is that those characters are always being constantly punished. They're always getting the "you reap what you sow," which is, I feel like, is a more appropriate version of seeing someone who's egotistical walking through the earth, instead of watching them kind of get rewarded, or instead of kind of watch them get unscathed, I'll say, to emerge from most of these situations unscathed and never have any reflection. They're just constantly getting punished, and that's what they get. Instead of having reflection and changing, they just get punished, which is fine. And I feel like I think that Ramy, based on season, hopefully as they go into season 3, maybe that's the direction that they take, where they finally get to a place where he's having some self-reflection and actually beginning to change as a person, because I think they tried to indicate that that's what he was trying to do here, but he was doing it in such a self-serving way. Much of season 2 also stars Mahershala Ali as Ramy's sheikh, and their interactions is fantastic. Mahershala Ali does a fantastic job. It was actually very interesting to see him show up as a recurring character, like a very big part of season 2, and say, wow, you guys really you guys really spent good money on this. That was a good budget request to get Mahershala Ali, who actually is a Muslim in real life. So he brought something to this role that I thought was very unique. He brought all of his Mahershala Ali-ness, as well as, you could tell, an understanding of the Muslim faith, which I think was important. And this second season also deals with the idea of there being Black Muslims, actually Black Muslims and Arab Muslims, in which I understand that there could be Black Arab Muslims, but in this case, I'm saying Black people and brown people, and what those interactions look like. And then also what those interactions look like when they're dealing with white people, which also very interesting. So it's a good show. I think the acting is good. I think in season 2, what they did was, in season 1, they had a couple of episodes that weren't about Ramy, but about the people around him. Like there was an episode about his mother, an episode about his sister, I'm not mistaken. And in this season 2, they do the same thing, where they step away from Ramy and they do episodes about other characters, and they do 4 of the episodes in season 2 of the 10 episodes are about characters around Ramy. And what I found was there was actually a lot more interesting stories in the people around Ramy than with Ramy himself. And I really like the fact that they're taking time to develop out those characters. And I kind of hope they keep going in that direction. I would love to see, and I don't know if I necessarily need to see a spinoff, but I'd love to see more stories about Ramy's family. And that's what the those spinoff stories were about. All of the acting, I think, is solid. I think it's a good show. I like it. I don't love it. And I just, there's just a couple of things about it that just, and it's, I like that it exists. Like everything about it that I like that a show like this can be about a Muslim Egyptian American man, you know what I mean? And it still be like kind of be about a trash human. Like this is typically a show that would have been about like a white person grappling with their faith and stumbling through life or whatever. This could have been easily been that type of show, but this is not that show. And I feel like this show shows a part of Americanness that we actually don't really get to see, which is that people that are dealing with America and dealing with, you know, culture that is kind of like in opposition of everything that they're trying to be or trying to achieve. So I think this show does a very good job of troubling that water and discussing those points. But with all of that being said, I would probably give it 3.5 stars of 5. And I think I really liked, I would have given the first season 4 stars. And the second season, you know, I didn't like the second season as much, but I don't think it's because the quality of the show went down as much as I really did not enjoy watching Ramy do what Ramy was doing in season 2. So, but I would strongly still recommend for everyone to watch this show. I think it's interesting. I think it's definitely an escape from the times that we're living in once again. And I think it discusses very poignant questions that I think are very important for, you know, for now. I mean, and when I say now, I mean like now in the middle of, you know, race riots and racial turmoil within, and I said race riots, but in the middle of a racial uprising, this is a good show to kind of watch and discuss and say, you know, just to, I don't know, to have some perspective on what America is like for brown folks. I mean, and there's black folks in the second season too. So like, it's just, I think it's an interesting commentary, and an interesting perspective. So, yeah. Watch Ramy. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of ohitsBigRon Studios. One more thing. I realized I did this before. Ramy is available on FX and on Hulu. So if you have Hulu, that's where you can watch it. I sometimes forget to say that, and I forget that these are all streaming, and I just say, hey, watch this, and I don't tell you where to watch it. So watch it on Hulu. Leaving the Theater is a production of ohitsBigRon Studios. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. To find out more about this show and other ohitsBigRon Studios shows, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ohitsBigRon. That's at ohitsBigRon. If you like this show, check out our sister show, Time Well Spent. Leaving the Theater will be back soon, but until then, I'll be here on the couch.